Harrenhal, that huge semi-ruined castle at the heart of the Seven Kingdoms, casts a long shadow across the history of the Seven Kingdoms. But what is the history of Harrenhal? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover George R.R. Martin's world in depth, as well as other great fantasy worlds like The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. If you're new here, welcome. And this is your spoiler warning for House of the Dragon, and also A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. I'll be talking about some things here which will probably happen in the later seasons, so proceed with caution. Harrenhal looms large in almost all of the pivotal moments of the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon's invasion, the Great Council of 101, the Dance of the Dragons, Robert's Rebellion, the list goes on. By Westerosi standards, Harrenhal is a relatively new castle, being just around 300 years old. Its origins come from the time just before Aegon's invasion, when large tracts of the area of the Trident, what we now know today as the Riverlands, were owned by the Iron Islanders, specifically House Hoare, and became known as the Kingdom of the Isles and the Rivers. The third generation of those kings, Harrenhal, decided that he needed a castle to cement his hold on the land and as a monument to himself. Harren, known as Harren the Black, wasn't exactly a modest man, and decided that this castle should eclipse all other castles in Westeros, Winterfell, Storm's End, you name it, and not just be bigger than them, but dwarf them. Just a few details of the final design reveal the ridiculous scale we're talking about here. The Great Hall has 35 hearths and is big enough to host an entire army. The Godswood is 70 acres, all still inside the castle walls. The shortest tower is 50% taller than Winterfell's tallest tower, even with the top being melted and broken. More on that in just a moment. Building this enormous structure took 4 decades, even with the builders working at breakneck speed. And tragically, I mean that quite literally. We're told that thousands of workers and slaves, for the Iron Islanders kept slaves, died in the process. All the riches of that kingdom flooded into ornamenting the castle. 3,000-year-old weirwoods were cut down and used as timber. This was a construction the likes of which had never been seen before in Westeros, and it was all in honour of King Harren the Black. The castle was finally ready, and Harren moved in, ironically on the day Aegon and his sister wives landed at what is now known as King's Landing to launch their invasion. Harren, drunk with power and hubris, declared his new castle impregnable. And it perhaps was against any force seen in Westeros for millennia, but not against dragons. Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread high over the castle, and its black-hot flame melted the stones of the towers. Harren and his entire family were killed, and Harrenhal, already black-walled, took on a charred appearance, with the tops of the towers melted away, stone slowly setting as it dripped down to the ground. The result was an eerie, desolate monument to ambition and pride. The castle still stood, though, blackened and blasted as it was, the largest castle in the heart of the new Seven Kingdoms, and Aegon gave it to one of his most loyal vassals, House Charis. And Aegon gave it lands to rule, extending far out, particularly to the southeast, past the God's Eye Lake into some of the most fertile and rich land in Westeros. It was a fine gift, although it quickly became apparent that those riches were sorely needed. As well as the immediate repairs needed to make the castle habitable again, the day-to-day running costs were huge. Those massive halls needed heating, the Godswood tending, a small army needed to man the walls alone. The best House Charis, or any other that followed them, could do was simply keep it running and stop it degrading further, often retreating into just 1 or 2 of the 5 towers and leaving the rest to lie cold and dormant. House Charis's rule was not long. In the year 37, Harrenhal was taken by Harren the Red, an outlaw who claimed to be Harren the Black's grandson, though he was swiftly defeated and the castle given to House Harroway. House Harroway rose quickly. Alice Harroway, the daughter of the new lord, was the woman Maegor the Cruel took to wife that caused such great controversy, leading him to go into exile. On his return, Lord Harroway was made Hand of the King, but as swift as their rise was, their fall was even swifter. Alice was accused of a string of affairs, almost certainly all made up, and in his anger, Maegor destroyed every person with the name Harroway that he could find, which left another vacancy. Maegor arranged a tourney where the victor would be named the new Lord of Harrenhal. A knight named Sir Walton Towers won, though he died just a few days later from the wounds he had sustained. His son inherited, though he also died just a few years later. All that was left of the line then was his young, sickly son, who lived with just a small household in one of the towers, allowing Rhaena Targaryen to stay in one of the other towers, which soon became known as the Widow's Tower. Soon enough, young, sickly Maegor Towers died, as did Rhaena, and as neither of Rhaena's children had children, Harrenhal was again, in the year 73 AC, in need of new owners. At which point, we should probably just pause to acknowledge what I'm sure you've noticed, that this is quite the turnover of ruling families. 5 different ruling families in just over 70 years, and it will only continue. We'll come back to the why a bit later in the video. Because after House Towers and Rhaena Targaryen came House Strong. To be fair to them, they lasted a while, and like their predecessors became quite central to the politics of the Seven Kingdoms. In the year 101 AC, old King Jaehaerys I called a great council of all the lords of the land to vote on who should succeed him as king. As the largest castle and in a prime central location, Harrenhal was chosen to host the event. We're told that the attendance was overwhelming. Over 1,000 lords turned up with various sized retinues over the course of half a year. The tiny local town of Harrenton became for a few months the 4th largest settlement in the land, behind only King's Landing, Old Town and Lannisport. The importance of that council can't really be overstated. We briefly saw it in the opening moments of Season 1 of House of the Dragon. Viserys, rather than Laenor Velaryon, became king, and a civil war was averted, although it has to be said that with the appointment of Otto Hightower as Hand of the King and Viserys' recognition of his daughter Rhaenyra as his heir, the seeds of another civil war were sown. Anyway, House Strong continued to go from strength to strength, pun intended. Lionel Strong had his turn as Hand of the King, Larys became Master of Whisperers, and Harwin became the lover of Princess Rhaenyra and father of her children, although Lionel and Harwin both died in a fire at Harrenhal in 120 AC. The castle changed hands a few times during the Dance of the Dragons. Daemon claimed it for the Blacks, then abandoned it before Aemond and Criston Cole claimed it for Team Green. Daemon and Aemond then met up at Harrenhal to fight to the death, Daemon famously slashing a cut in the weirwood tree there every day while he waited for Aemond. The cuts still bleed red sap years later. They mounted their dragons and fought, and both fell to their deaths with their dragons into the God's Eye Lake. The person who ended up in charge of Harrenhal as the dance ended was Alice Rivers, a fascinating character who was labelled a witch queen and claimed that her young son was the trueborn heir of Aemond Targaryen. Fire and Blood finishes before we find out her fate, which is a shame. All we know is that in 151 AC, Aegon III gave the castle to House Lothston, who again by Harrenhal standards had quite a good run. They helped out in the first couple of Blackfire rebellions, but then their rule, and I quote, ended in madness and chaos when Lady Danelle Lothston turned to the black arts during the reign of King Maekar I. Make of that what you will. House Went were next. You may remember that Sir Oswell Went was one of the Kingsguard at the Tower of Joy, and presumably one of Rhaegar's inner circle, and it was he who brokered the hosting of a great tourney at Harrenhal. What happened there, the Night of the Laughing Tree, Rhaegar and Lyanna, Jaime Lannister joining the Kingsguard, and so much more, set the stage for Robert's rebellion. George R. R. Martin has said that he could have written an entire book about what happened at Harrenhal during those few days. House Went survived the rebellion, but by the time of the War of the Five Kings it was down to one member, Shella Went. She was swiftly deposed by Tywin Lannister, who stationed his army there for a time. After he left, And let's quickly rattle through this because most of these people didn't last long. Amory Lorch held it for a bit before passing it to Vargo Hote, who handed it to Roose Bolton after the Weasel Soup incident. This was the period where Arya and Jaqen H'ghar were at Harrenhal. Roose headed up north for the Red Wedding, leaving it once more to Vargo Hote, who lost it to the Mountain, who was recalled to King's Landing to fight Oberyn Martell, leaving Polliver in charge, though he's then killed by the Hound, so when Jaime passes through, he puts Bonifer Hasty in charge until Littlefinger can claim it. Littlefinger had been made Lord of Harrenhal by the Lannisters partway through the war, but had intentionally avoided going there. As I said, it all gets a bit messy at that point, and by then the idea that Harrenhal was cursed was well and truly embedded in the popular understanding. The mortality rate for the Lords of Harrenhal is pretty horrendous. A quick rundown of those houses who had ruled showed that they had not just been deposed, but utterly destroyed so that nothing remained of them. That seems beyond simple coincidence, so a curse? Perhaps, or maybe the Children of the Forest intervening somehow to prevent the establishment of a permanent, powerful house on the shores of the God's Eye Lake. Again, possible, but let's leave our conclusions on that to another video. Instead, let's consider why Harrenhal is so important, because it is important. It's at the heart of so many central moments in the history of Westeros since the Targaryen invasion. Things that happen there resound more widely, impacting the whole continent. When Balerion melted Harrenhal's towers, it wasn't just the end of House Hoare, it was the moment that convinced other lords to bend the knee. They saw what the Targaryens were capable of and chose pragmatism over valour. When the Great Council chose Viserys over Laenor, the course of history was shifted, and when Rhaegar and Lyanna first met at Harrenhal, that plunged the whole realm into civil war. Some of the answer is surely the purely physical and geographical elements here. Harrenhal may be a shadow of what it could have been, but it is still the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, still central, just a few miles from the inn at the crossroads. But more important is what Harrenhal symbolises. It is hubris, pride. It is the pursuit of visible power, the desire to not just have the biggest and best castle around, but something that is beyond debate, something everyone must bow down to. And this is a clear echo to one of the major themes in A Song of Ice and Fire, the maddening futility and small-mindedness of the pursuit of power. Most exemplified by the squabbling over the Iron Throne, it is here too. Harrenhal is, and always has been, a decaying reminder that pride comes before a fall. If you'd like to see more videos diving into George R.R. Martin's world of Ice and Fire, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.